Morning and welcome, Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason on this Friday, and man, it couldn't get here soon enough. It's been a crazy week, all kinds of things going on. We got big economic data to report. It is not what the Fed wanted to see. We've got the bond market screaming higher again. The chance for another rate hike definitely heated up. We'll get to all of that and so much more. But man, we yesterday, they always say, bad news always happens in threes. Our 800 number is floating out in the universe somewhere. Here's the good news. CenturyLink is saying, no, it will be working today. Just not working this second, but going to be working very, very soon. Right now, just call our local number, 623-780-3117. But hopefully I can say before we get off the air today that the 800 number is back up and working. So that goes out. Then Jason had an issue with his studio, so we didn't have Jason yesterday. And then the stream at the radio station, it goes down. I mean, it was just a mess. Here's the good news. The stream's back up and working. We got Jason here today. It's Friday, and you know what? I'm hoping by the end of the day that the 800 number will be back, and I'll be a happy camper if that happens.
Yeah, it was an interesting day yesterday, right, Joe? Interesting day. So
There's a lot.
There's a lot going on.
A lot of, yeah. And besides a bunch of other stuff that was going on. So lot happening. AllAmericanGold.com is the website. And we had a bunch of, well, I shouldn't say a bunch, but we did get inflation data out today. We also had consumer sentiment out today, in the sentiment from the consumer. And I have no doubt that this is true, that inflation is still a huge problem. That was much higher than expected. Then on the Fed's favorite inflation gauge, it actually rose. So this is an April number. This number got hotter than the March number, Jason. So, and when we look at in terms of fake inflation, okay, so the lowest the Fed can make it, right? The PCE fake number, hey, we're going to use a bunch of mumbo jumbo logic to pretend that inflation isn't that bad. 0.4% in April, and then of course the annualized or the year-over-year number, that one came in much hotter as well, back up close to that 5% number. And Jason, the odds now of another rate hike. We started the week, and really go to last week, the odds were 10% of a rate hike. Then they got to 25% earlier this week. Then, of course, we got the jobless claims data. Everyone's baffled. We still don't know. Like, just some Massachusetts massacre mystery. We don't even know what the number is. But apparently it's a lot lower than what they were telling us over the last several weeks. And then today, with this inflation number, right now, as it sits right now, more than 50% chance, Jason, we're going to get another rate hike. Listen, that's going to put so much more pressure on a bunch of these banks. The whole banking problem coming right back.
Yeah, it's just interesting how the talk goes a certain direction, but then the numbers, however they put those numbers together, it sure seems like they really want to keep raising rates. And like I keep saying, we don't know what the Fed actually wants. You know, they say they're here to help the government and help the banks, do their business. But really, when it comes down to it, it's a private company. And if they need to crush the markets and crush the banks, and at some point that's going to be the play. And keeping the rates high keeps the inflation down, which is essentially one of their most important jobs to be valid, right? So they can make up whatever they need to, Joe, to do whatever they need to plan. And so it's almost like they're just trying to shush everyone. It's okay. We'll raise the rates. The numbers it's forcing us to do so. Doesn't that feel like what they're doing, Joe? They're going to raise it a few more times.
Yeah, and the borrowing at the Fed window, they are trying to keep this very, very quiet. But it topped, and we have a new high in banks borrowing from the Fed. In other words, hey, we lost more deposits. We don't want to sell these securities, but whether it be treasuries or mortgage-backed securities, because if we do, we're going to lose a bunch of money, right? We'll be the next bank on the list. So they're borrowing it from the Fed, and the Fed is, pretending to pay them full value for it, even though it's not worth the paper it's printed on. Jason, this is not a good sign. And, of course, if this does happen, now, we still got a few more weeks that we can get some more data points that maybe can help out, but I just don't see it. I mean, the PCE, like I said, it's the fakest number they have. And even that one says inflation actually got worse from March to April. I don't know how you don't raise rates if that's the case. Patriot Radio News Hour. We'll be back after the break. Still a little while longer here, 623-780-3117. The 800 number should be back up and working shortly. Quick look here at the markets right now. We got the Dow's up 300 points. Of course, the Dow's been down, 6 days in a row, something like that. I'm a little worried about it because the 10-year note spiking today on this inflation data, 3.85 on the 10-year note. That's the highest it's been in quite some time. Gold is flat. It's down $2 here, 1942. Silver's up 26 cents. Back above $23. Of course, we got to talk about the debt ceiling. I got an update on that. If you're looking at it, as we said, make sure you're adding to your portfolio before this debt ceiling gets resolved, because I think the dollar trend is going to go back the other way here. But if you're like, man, this is enough. This is nonsense, right? These guys have totally lost faith. And, of course, now I'm telling you, every time they raise rates, it puts these banks in so much more peril and jeopardy here. And again, everybody out there is telling you there's going to be more of these failures happening. If you're looking for another place to put some assets, check out our friends at YRefi, up to 10.25% fixed rates of return. And you got to make sure you're having your hard-earned. I mean, let's face it. You got money put away. You worked hard for it. You got to get that protection. This is another good place to go look for it. InvestYRefi.com. That's the word invest, the letter Y, REFY.com, or call them at 888-YRefi24. Remember, you got to have the $50,000. That's kind of the hiccup on that one. But check those guys out. As Jason, we have a couple of different issues going on. The much hotter inflation data, the Fed's PCE deflator, they were hoping it was only going to be up 0.3 for the month. It was up 0.4 for the month. And then, of course, the year-over-year number also spiking higher and causing problems. And then inside of it, private wages got hotter, went from 5.3 to 5.6. government wages got hotter, 5.1 to 5.3, and inflation-adjusted spending up 0.5%. And of course, well, that just means, listen, you're paying, at that number, that's 6% inflation, Jason. I'm sorry. That's just how that math works. You can deflate this and deflate that and don't count this and substitute that. You can do all that stuff. But the realities are, it's just like we've been telling everybody for the last 2 years, Jason. They're in a corner. There's no good outcome here.
Correct. And if they destroy enough currency and don't print money, then they will get rid of the inflation. That can happen. But I've said many times, Joe, we don't know what you can't trust the Fed and the government for what they're printing and not reporting, because they've done it. It's been shown. I don't know why nobody talks about it. That Glenn Beck piece we played last year, I'll keep going back to it, which is the FOIA request, and they didn't print 5.5 trillion to save the banks in the Great Recession in 08, 9, and 10. They printed 29 trillion. And I've been saying since, I think it was late last year, but this year is it wouldn't surprise me, Joe, if they're going to keep the rates high and print money wherever they feel they need to target the winners and the losers. Because when you get to print the money and not tell anybody who you're giving it to, then you get to save who you want to save. Janet Yellen even said when she was being asked by Congress, who's going to be saved, who's not going to be saved. She's like, well, we're going to decide who has to be saved, who doesn't be saved. And that's very easy to do if you just sort of under the table, here, this bank gets to live, this bank doesn't get to live. And I bet there's very specific reasons as to who survives and who doesn't, Joe. So I don't trust the numbers that are coming in as pro rate hike. I don't even trust that, but it seems like they really want to hike the rates, doesn't it?
Well, and again, you had the University of Michigan, the consumer survey. And the one thing that rang out there was, hey, it's inflation, right? They're consumers telling the Fed, hey, listen, I don't know what you're smoking. Everything's more expensive. And again, it's something where it was a policy mistake 2 meetings ago. It was a policy mistake last meeting. This will be another policy mistake if they have to do it again. But here's the choice. It's a policy mistake if they raise it, and it's a policy mistake if they don't raise it, right? And this is that box that we keep telling you that they're in. And quite honestly, when that is the case, if the Fed really wants any credibility at all, Jason, they have to keep hiking. They have to, because that's the mandate, right? The mandate is stable pricing and full employment. Well, employment, it's still kicking along, dude. But you know what? It's slowing and people are getting laid off, but it's still, unemployment rate at the last report was still 3.4, 3.5. I mean, that's way below normal. They almost have to keep doing this, which is essentially going to blow up more of these banks.
Well, and if there's not a good play, which we've known this for a while when the inflation came in 2022, if there's not a good play, then it's kind of easy to try to figure out what the Fed wants to do. It's going to be whatever helps the Fed. And I'll tell you right now, if banks go under, that's less competition for the owners of the Fed, the really big players. So I think less banks helps the Fed, Joe. I think that's been a goal of theirs that they don't say out loud. And so raising rates, that should create enough economic stress to liquidate a bunch of banks in this. So it makes sense to me. This is why I've said I don't know what they'll do for sure. Nobody knows for sure what they're planning, but it sure seems like in the situation where there's no good play, well, what helps them the most, and that's to keep the inflation under control and raise those rates.
Yeah, so let me give you an update here, and then we'll get to the debt ceiling next. But I want to give you an update on what's going on at the Fed window and then deposits. So when we started this problem, okay, so go back to, April, March, late March, early April, when the banking problems, when we've first started mentioning Silicon Valley Bank, there was $19 trillion of deposits in banks. Okay. Now, something like $10 trillion of it was insured. $9 trillion was uninsured. As of a few days ago, the $19 trillion is down to $17 trillion. I mean, that's significant, right? That there's been $2 trillion flowing out of banks, people going into gold, people going into silver, you guys calling Joey, which I keep telling you to do, and they have to go to the Fed window to keep borrowing money. Right now, up $47 billion more dollars to a new record high. And this is into money markets, right? To $5.39 trillion. That's where a lot of people are going because, hey, I can get some form of rate of return. But what happens is when that money, now they've got to go to the Fed window and start borrowing more money. So the Fed, even though they're doing quantitative tightening, right, they're selling off $75 billion worth of assets. The problem is, guess what, Jason? The banks are borrowing, again, the $47 billion that left into money markets. They ended up going to the Fed window and borrowing that amount of money. So the Fed's balance sheet is barely shrinking at all. And if it gets any worse, right, the Fed will be back. Remember at the height of the crisis, the Fed's balance sheet went all the way back to almost $9 trillion. And we may have that situation happen again. And you can understand why that $2 trillion has already left the banks.
And I think some of that $2 trillion, maybe a lot of it, Joe, is some really big players paying off debt. If you're in a higher interest situation like we have now with the rates being higher, and there's not a lot of great places to be investing because there's a lot of fear as to what's going to happen, then let's just say you're like Trump or Robert Kiyosaki and you got all these properties and you got tons of debt, but it's all debt. It's all good debt. That's how you make your billions. Well, in this situation, you pay down a whole bunch of debt right now in anticipation of markets crashing, and now you can borrow against those properties at lower interest rates when everybody else is burning in the streets, so to speak. So I think a lot of that $2 trillion, Joe, might be just, because when you pay off debt in a debt money system, when you pay off debt, you eliminate money. So if you have deposits in the bank, you pull that out, you pay off your loan, that money's destroyed as a debt money system. So, Joe, I think there's a lot of big players getting ready they're salivating for this big crash coming, and so they can just cash in, Joe.
The fear here is, are these banks going to start pulling lines of credit? Are they going to start choking off the loans to small businesses and things of that nature? Because right now, that's one of the things that they're going to try to do. They've got to shrink these loans. They've got to shrink them, right? Because otherwise they're vulnerable to the next rate hike that may now be coming all of a sudden. And remember, Jamie Dimon, it's haunted me now with him coming out and saying, hey, not only are they going to hike one or two more times, like we could 7% was the number he used. I mean, I just don't. There's no easy way out for these banks, and this is what the real problem is. And so, Jason, that's one of the only things. And I'm just trying, to think about what could they do. They can't sell these, treasuries. Can't sell those because those are losers. Right now, yields are rising again. Right now, the every time the 10-year yield goes higher, the loss gets bigger. Right, and now could we see the 10-year note go back over 4%? That would be my guess. If all of a sudden the Fed's, the rate hiking cycle's not over, that makes that problem worse. Commercial-backed real estate can't sell that crap. Maybe some residential, but there's probably not a lot in their portfolio that they can get rid of. The only other way to shrink that loan book would be to start pulling lines of credits from small businesses. I mean, that's got to be on the table.
I'm sure when it comes to keeping yourself floating as a bank, you'll pretty much do whatever needs to be done, right, Joe? So yeah, I'm sure all of those things are on the plate for survival, And I think they're worried about inflation, Joe, because the next 2 months for year-over-year CPI, 0.6 and then 9.1 for the June and July numbers. Okay, and then from there on,
8.6, 9.1, and then it started going down, right?
Going down. Now,
right.
If they can't get the inflation numbers going down year over year from last year, when the number starts going down, this is why I think inflation is going to go up. Look. It went from 8.5 to 8.3 last year over year. So look at when it went this year, it went from 5.0 to 4.9, whereas every previous month it was going down a half percent, right? I think inflation in the back half of the year is a big problem for them, Joe.